The vast emptiness of space stretched before them, filled with stars that shimmered like scattered diamonds. But for Captain Emily Hall, nothing felt peaceful about this moment. It was the calm before the storm, a silence that had lasted far too long. The crew of the Sentinel, Earth's newest warship, had been stationed on the edge of known space for months, watching, waiting, and listening. The threat of war had always been distant, a mere whisper, but now something felt different. "Captain," Lieutenant Daniel's voice broke through the stillness of the command deck. "We're receiving a strange signal. It's coming from the far side of the system. It's weak, but it's there." Emily's heart skipped a beat. A signal. They had been listening for any signs of the Vormec, the alien fleet that had been slowly encroaching on human territory. But this was different. The Vormec weren't known for their subtlety. They attacked full force with no warning. But this signal, this one, it felt wrong. "Can you get a fix on its origin?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Daniels tapped a few keys, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's coming from a nearby planet. There's no known life on it, but the signal matches the kind we've seen from alien technology before. It's faint, but it's there." Emily stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "How long until we reach the planet?" 2 hours, Captain," Daniels replied. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't comforting. The crew exchanged nervous glances, sensing the unease that was settling in the air. They were prepared for an attack, ready to face the unknown. But this was different. This was not how war began. "Prepare for a full scan of the planet," Emily ordered, her voice firm. "We'll find out what's going on, and we'll do it quietly. I don't want to take any chances." The Sentinel drifted silently through space, cutting through the cold void with precision. Emily watched the star map flicker on the screen, a trail of glowing lines leading them toward the mysterious planet. Each second felt longer than the last, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. The crew remained tense, waiting for something to happen. Something, anything, to break the silence. As they neared the planet, the signal grew stronger, pulsing in rhythm with their ship's engines. But something wasn't right. The planet itself appeared dark, lifeless, and barren. No signs of civilization, no structures, no life. It was almost as if the signal was a beacon, a warning. "Captain," said Lieutenant Harris, the ship's chief engineer, "we're picking up strange readings. It's not just the signal. There's something in the atmosphere, something interfering with our sensors. It's like the planet is alive, but in a way that doesn't make sense." Emily's instincts flared. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. "Get us closer," she ordered. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The Sentinel moved closer to the planet's surface, its engines humming with power. The crew continued to scan the environment, looking for any clues as to what was happening. The signal grew stronger as they descended, now unmistakable in its frequency. "Captain, we're approaching the source of the signal," Daniel said, his voice tight. "But there's no sign of any activity on the surface. No movement, no heat signatures. It's like the planet is empty." Emily's mind raced. Something wasn't adding up. A signal with no source, a planet with no life. It felt like a trap, but she couldn't place why. Suddenly, the ship shuddered. The lights flickered for a moment, and then the ship's warning systems blared to life. "Warning! Incoming energy surge detected," shouted Daniels, his face pale. "The source of the signal. It's charging up. It's a weapon." Emily's eyes widened. "Get us out of here. Now." But it was too late. The sky above the planet erupted with blinding energy. A massive beam of light shot from the surface, reaching out toward the Sentinel with terrifying speed. The crew scrambled to their stations as the ship rocked violently under the force of the attack. "Shields at 20%, Captain," Harris called out, her hands flying over the controls. "We're losing power." Divert all power to the shields. We can't let them take us down, Emily shouted. The Sentinel lurched again, the weapon's beam hitting the ship squarely. The ship groaned under the impact, its hull cracking with the force. The crew was thrown from their seats as the ship began to spin out of control. "Brace for impact," Emily yelled. With a deafening crash, the Sentinel was hurled away from the planet, its systems failing one by one. The crew clung to their stations, fighting to stay conscious as the ship spiraled through space, the eerie signal continuing to pulse in the background. Everything went dark. When Emily came to, she was lying in a chair, her head throbbing. Her fingers were still clutching the command console. The ship had stopped moving, and the eerie silence returned, broken only by the faint hum of damaged systems. "Status report," Emily said weakly. "We've lost power to most of the ship," Harris replied, her voice strained. "Life support is failing. We've been hit badly, Captain." Emily looked around at her crew. They were all shaken, but they were alive. "For now. We need to get back to Earth," Emily said, determination returning to her voice. "We've just been attacked, but this is only the beginning." The crew nodded, knowing the battle was far from over. They had survived the first attack, but there were many more questions now. Why had the Vormak been so quiet? What had they been hiding? And what was this strange signal that had led them to this deadly encounter? The answers were out there, waiting, and the Sentinel would be the one to find them. But first, they needed to survive. The Sentinel drifted in the darkness of space, the crew uncertain of what the future held, but ready for whatever came next. The war had just begun, and with humanity's warship now entering the battlefield, the galaxy would never be the same again. The Sentinel floated motionless in the cold void of space, drifting away from the source of the devastating energy blast. Inside, the crew scrambled to repair the damaged systems, but the ship was in bad shape. Captain Emily Hall stood at the command center, her mind racing with questions. They had barely survived the surprise attack, but they were still alive. For now. "Status report, Lieutenant Daniels," Emily demanded, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've lost most of our power, Captain," Daniels replied, his fingers moving rapidly over the damaged console. "Communications are down. The engines are offline, and the weapon systems are severely damaged. We're floating in space with no way to defend ourselves." Emily clenched her fists. They had been caught completely off guard. The energy blast had come from nowhere, seemingly out of thin air, and it had struck them with terrifying precision. The worst part was that they still didn't know who or what had attacked them. The Vormak weren't known for their stealth. This was something else entirely. "How long until we can get the engines online?" Emily asked, trying to focus on the immediate problem at hand. Daniels paused for a moment, scanning the damaged systems. "It's going to take hours to get everything back online, Captain. At least 6 hours, maybe more. We're stuck here." The sound of soft beeping filled the room as a new alert flashed on the console. Emily's heart skipped a beat. A new signal. This time, it was different. The energy signature was strange, almost like a heartbeat, pulsing slowly but steadily. "Where is it coming from?" Emily asked, her voice tight with suspicion. "Unknown," Daniel said, his brow furrowed. "It's coming from the same direction as the original signal, but much stronger now. It's almost like it's guiding us, Captain." Emily looked out at the dark expanse of space, her mind racing. The first signal had been a trap, leading them straight to an attack. Now, this new signal seemed to be doing the same thing. But why? Who was sending it? And for what purpose? "Can we trace it?" Emily asked, unwilling to take any chances. "We're not sure," Daniels replied, looking back at the console. "Our sensors are still malfunctioning, and with the ship's power systems down, it's hard to get a clear read. But one thing is for certain, we need to investigate." Emily took a deep breath, her mind made up. "Prepare the crew. We're going in. We have no choice." Her words were resolute. She knew they couldn't just sit and wait. They had to act. The fate of the Sentinel and its crew depended on it. The crew worked quickly, gathering their gear and preparing for what was to come. There was a strange tension in the air, a nervous energy that crackled through the ship. No one knew what they were walking into, but they all knew one thing for certain. This was no ordinary mission. Whatever was out there, it was ready for them. Once the team was ready, Emily led the way to the ship's escape pods. The Sentinel was in no condition for interplanetary travel, but the escape pods were still functional. They would take the crew down to the surface of the mysterious planet that had caused them so much trouble. The pods were small and cramped, but they were fast. With a jolt, the escape pod detached from the Sentinel and shot toward the planet's surface, cutting through the atmosphere with a controlled burn. Emily sat in silence, her mind sharp and focused. They had no idea what they were going to find, but she was determined to uncover the truth. As they descended, the planet below came into view. It was an eerie sight, a barren, lifeless world with a dark, stormy sky. The planet seemed to be covered in craggy mountains and deep ravines, with no signs of civilization. But the signal was still there, pulsing like a heartbeat, calling them closer. The pod touched down with a slight thud, the hatch opening to reveal the harsh landscape outside. Emily stood up, motioning for the crew to follow her. "Stay alert," she warned. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." The crew followed closely behind, their footsteps crunching on the dry ground. The air was thin, and the temperature was frigid. But the most unsettling thing was the silence. There was no wildlife, no wind, nothing to indicate that this planet had ever supported life. "Where's the signal coming from?" Lieutenant Daniels asked, scanning the surroundings. "It's coming from that mountain range," Emily replied, pointing toward a jagged peak in the distance. "That's where the pulse is strongest." The crew moved out, making their way across the barren landscape toward the mountains. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the very ground beneath their feet was waiting for something to happen. As they approached the base of the mountains, the signal became louder, more intense. It was almost as if the planet itself was alive, resonating with a power they couldn't understand. The crew felt a sense of foreboding, a deep unease settling in their hearts. "Captain," said Lieutenant Harris, the ship's engineer, her voice shaking slightly. This doesn't feel right." Emily turned to her. "I know, Harris, but we have to find out what's going on. The signal isn't just some random anomaly. It's leading us here for a reason." They continued up the rocky path, the pulse of the signal growing stronger with each step. As they neared the peak, they came across something that made their blood run cold, an ancient structure, half buried in the rocks, covered in strange alien symbols. It was clear that it didn't belong here. It was alien, something that didn't fit with the planet's desolate landscape. The crew gathered around the structure, their eyes wide with shock and curiosity. Emily stepped forward, her heart racing. "What is this place?" Daniels whispered, awe and fear mixing in his voice. "I don't know," Emily replied, her gaze fixed on the strange symbols. "But I think we've just discovered something far bigger than we ever imagined." The planet was hiding secrets, and those secrets were about to change everything. The ancient structure loomed in front of them, its alien symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered, and the strange energy surrounding it made the air feel charged. Emily's heart raced as she approached the entrance, the crew following closely behind. She could sense something was waiting for them inside, something that would change the course of their mission, and possibly their fate. "Stay alert," Emily ordered. Her voice was steady, but the tension in the air was palpable. The crew had no idea what they were about to uncover, but they couldn't turn back now. Whatever secrets this planet held, they were too important to ignore. Lieutenant Daniels approached the entrance cautiously, his hand hovering over his blaster, ready for anything. As he stepped forward, the symbols on the wall seemed to shift, glowing brighter. The door to the structure creaked open with a low hum, revealing a dark interior. The air was cold and stale, and the smell of ancient decay filled their noses. "I don't like this," Lieutenant Harris whispered, her eyes darting around the darkened space. "This place gives me the creeps." Emily nodded. "I know, Harris, but we need answers." They stepped into the structure, the dim light from their helmets casting long shadows on the walls. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It felt as if the entire structure was alive, watching them, waiting. As they walked down a long corridor, the sound of their footsteps echoed in the silence. The walls were covered in more alien symbols, and the faint pulse of the signal was growing stronger, guiding them further into the heart of the structure. It was as if the signal was leading them to something, or someone. At the end of the corridor, they reached a large chamber. The air was thick with dust, and the floor was cracked and uneven. In the center of the room stood a massive pedestal, and on it, something that sent chills down Emily's spine, a glowing orb pulsating with an eerie light. "The signal. It's coming from that," Daniels muttered, staring at the orb. "It's alive, Captain." Emily took a step forward, her eyes fixed on the orb. It seemed to be calling to her, urging her to get closer. But she hesitated. Something wasn't right. The intensity of the signal had reached its peak, and it felt like they were on the edge of discovering something monumental. "Be careful," Emily warned the crew, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know what this is. Stay back." She moved cautiously toward the pedestal, her eyes never leaving the orb. As she reached out to touch it, a sudden, sharp sound broke the silence, a hiss, followed by a deep rumbling noise. The entire structure seemed to shake, and the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. "What the hell is happening?" Harris cried out, stumbling as the floor buckled beneath her. "We need to get out of here now," Daniel shouted, his voice rising with panic. But it was too late. The orb began to glow brighter, and the ground beneath them cracked open, revealing a dark abyss. Before anyone could react, a massive wave of energy surged from the orb, knocking them all off their feet. Emily felt a jolt of energy rush through her body, like electricity coursing through her veins. Her vision blurred, and she could hear the voices of her crew screaming in terror, but she couldn't move. The energy was too strong, holding her in place. Suddenly, everything went black. When Emily came to, she found herself lying on the cold floor of the chamber. Her head was pounding, and her limbs felt heavy. She blinked, trying to clear the fog from her mind. Slowly, she pushed herself up, surveying the room. The orb was no longer on the pedestal. In its place was a strange, pulsing energy field, crackling with power. "Captain, are you okay?" Daniel's voice broke through the fog, his face appearing in her blurry vision. Emily nodded, though her body still felt weak. She could hear the rest of the crew groaning as they slowly regained consciousness. The tremors had stopped, but the air still felt thick with energy. "What happened?" Emily asked, her voice hoarse. Daniels glanced around, his expression a mix of awe and fear. "I don't know, Captain. 1 minute we were fine, and the next, that thing, it did something to us. I can feel the energy still buzzing in the air. It's like it's alive." Emily stood up, her legs shaky. She stepped toward the energy field cautiously, reaching out to touch it. The air around it seemed to vibrate, almost like it was alive, responding to her presence. "This isn't good," Harris said, her voice trembling. "Whatever that orb was, it's not just some ancient relic. It's connected to something much bigger." Emily nodded grimly. She could feel it, too. Whatever power was inside that orb, it had just awakened something deep within the planet. And the energy surge wasn't just a random occurrence, it was a signal, a call. "We need to get out of here," Emily said, her voice firm, though her mind was racing. "We have to warn the fleet. Whatever that thing was, it's not just a relic. It's a weapon, or a key to something even worse." The crew didn't argue. They turned and made their way back to the exit, their steps quick and purposeful. But as they walked back through the corridor, the strange energy seemed to follow them, like a shadow, pressing closer. The planet was hiding something far darker than they had imagined, and now they had just unleashed it. As they reached the escape pods, Emily glanced back at the structure one last time. The pulsing energy field seemed to grow stronger with each passing second, as if the planet was awakening, ready to unleash whatever lay hidden beneath its surface. They had barely survived the first wave of chaos. What was coming next, however, was something none of them could have prepared for. As the crew of the Vanguard made their way back to their ship, the sense of urgency and fear weighed heavily on them. The strange energy field that had surrounded the orb still buzzed in their minds, a constant reminder of the chaos they had narrowly escaped. The unknown force they had unleashed was now rippling across the planet, and Emily knew it was only a matter of time before the enemy would come looking for answers. "We need to contact the fleet," Captain Daniels said, his voice tight with worry, as he worked at the ship's communications console. "We've uncovered something big. Something dangerous." Emily nodded, but her mind was racing. Whatever they had found on that planet was more than just an ancient artifact. It was a weapon, or perhaps a signal. The enemy, whoever they were, would have already detected the surge of energy, and she had no doubt they would be coming. The question was, who were they, and what were they after? "Do you think they knew we were there?" Harris asked, her eyes wide as she looked out the window. The stars twinkled coldly beyond, but Emily knew that beneath the calm of space, something was stirring. "I don't know," Emily replied, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "But it doesn't matter now. Whatever we awaken down there, it's connected to something much bigger than we thought, and I'm sure the enemy knows exactly what it is." Just as she spoke, the ship's sensors began to beep urgently. The crew's heads snapped toward the console as the display flickered, showing a fleet of enemy warships heading toward their position. "Captain," Daniels said, his voice rising in alarm. "There's a fleet inbound. They're moving fast. It looks like they're coming straight for us." Emily's heart skipped a beat. It was too soon for the enemy to have mobilized. They must have detected the energy surge, and now they were coming to investigate. But she couldn't help but feel that there was more to this than just a simple attack. The enemy was acting with purpose, and she had a sinking feeling that their true goal wasn't just to destroy the Vanguard. It was to capture what they had uncovered. "We're being hunted," Harris whispered, her face pale. "What do we do now?" Emily clenched her fists, her mind working quickly. The Vanguard was fast, but it wasn't built to take on a fleet. They would have to outsmart their pursuers and make it back to the fleet to warn them. There was no other choice. Daniels, initiate evasive maneuvers. Harris, prepare the crew for battle. We're going to have to fight our way out of this. The crew scrambled into action, each member doing their part as Emily took her seat in the command chair. Her fingers flew over the controls, sending the ship into evasive maneuvers. The Vanguard swerved and dipped, narrowly avoiding the first volley of enemy fire. Explosions rocked the ship as they tore through the atmosphere, but Emily didn't flinch. She had been in worse situations before. "Enemy ships are closing in fast," Daniels reported, his voice tight. "We can't outrun them for long." Emily's mind raced. The fleet was still hours away, and they were already surrounded. They needed to buy time. As the enemy ships drew closer, she could feel the tension building in her chest. The fear of what might happen next was almost overwhelming. The crew had barely survived their encounter on the planet, and now they were facing a far more dangerous threat, one that seemed to know exactly where they were and what they had found. "Prepare for combat," Emily said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet determination. "We fight for every second we can buy." The Vanguard fired back, returning fire with everything it had. The enemy fleet was relentless, their weapons aimed with deadly precision. The first few shots rattled the ship, but Emily's crew was focused, working together with a sense of purpose that could only come from the threat of complete destruction. They had no choice but to hold their ground. Outside, the enemy ships began to form a tight perimeter, surrounding them from all sides. Emily could see the enemy fighters launch from their mothership, swarming toward them like a cloud of predatory insects. There were too many to count, and the Vanguard was outgunned. But there was something else, something nagging at the back of her mind. Why hadn't the enemy attacked full force yet? Why were they holding back? "Captain," Daniels said, his voice filled with suspicion. "Something's off. They're not attacking as aggressively as I'd expect. They're waiting for something." Emily's brow furrowed. Waiting for something. She turned to Harris, who was monitoring their energy levels. Could it be the orb? Emily asked, her heart sinking. The orb had emitted an energy surge when they touched it. Could it have triggered something else? Something even the enemy feared? Harris hesitated. Maybe. But whatever it was, it might have made us a bigger target than we realized. Emily clenched her jaw. Whatever was happening, they couldn't afford to wait around to find out. If they didn't make it out of this alive, the fleet would never know what they had discovered. The secret they had uncovered was far too important to be lost in a battle like this. "Hold tight, everyone," Emily said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We're going to make it out of here. I'll find a way." The crew nodded, ready to do whatever it took. But as they engaged the enemy, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they had just become pawns in a much larger game, one that was about to change the entire course of their war. The Vanguard shook violently as enemy fire hammered the shields, but Emily held her ground. She could see the incoming enemy fighters through the viewport, swarming around them like a deadly swarm of hornets. There was no time to hesitate, no room for mistakes. Every second counted as the battle raged on, and the stakes were higher than ever. "Captain, shields are holding at 40%, Daniels reported, his voice trained as he worked at the console. "But they won't last much longer under this pressure. Keep them up as long as you can." Emily shouted over the chaos, her eyes locked on the enemy fleet. The larger enemy ships were still maintaining their position, hovering in formation like a pack of predators waiting for their moment to strike. It was clear they were biding their time, but Emily didn't know for what. As the ship rocked from another hit, the feeling of dread gnawed at Emily's mind. The orb, was it responsible for all this? Could the enemy be after it, or was there something even worse at play? "Status report on the orb," Emily ordered. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. Harris's fingers flew across the console, her face pale as she scrolled through data. "Captain, the orb's energy levels are fluctuating. It's almost as if it's reacting to the enemy fleet." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Reacting? How? "It's like it's trying to communicate," Harris replied, her voice trembling. "Or maybe it's responding to the enemy's presence." The thought sent a chill down Emily's spine. Whatever the orb was, it wasn't just some relic from the past. It was alive, in a way, and somehow tied to the conflict now unfolding. "Can we get it under control?" Emily asked. Harris hesitated. "Not with the enemy so close. If we try to interact with it now, it could destabilize completely, and we wouldn't be able to protect it." "Then we need to focus on getting out of here," Emily said firmly. "Daniels, are we still in range of the enemy mothership?" "Yes, Captain." "They're close, too close. We won't survive another few minutes if we don't make a move." Emily scanned the battlefield. The enemy fleet was massive, far larger than anything they had encountered before. They were surrounded on all sides by ships that dwarfed the Vanguard. But Emily's mind was sharp, and her instincts were honed from years of commanding under pressure. "We can't win this battle head-on," she muttered to herself, then looked over at Daniels. "We need to break their formation, split them up, and find an escape route. Prepare the forward thrusters for a quick escape." Daniels's eyes flickered to the control panel, his fingers moving with swift precision. "Aye, Captain. Thrusters primed and ready. We'll have a window in 30 seconds. "Perfect," Emily said, setting her jaw. "We take that window and punch through. Once we're clear, We signal for reinforcements, but we have to make it out first. The ship rocked again as enemy fire struck, this time causing a fire in the rear compartments. Smoke began to filter into the bridge, and Emily felt the temperature rising. "Damage report," she barked. "Fire suppression systems engaged, Captain," Harris called out. "We've got it under control, barely." "Good," Emily said, her mind already racing ahead. She had to think 2 steps ahead of the enemy, but this was no longer just about survival. The orb, whatever it was too important to let fall into enemy hands. The enemy might be after it, but Emily didn't even know the full scope of its power. The enemy mothership loomed large in front of them, its weapons aimed directly at the Vanguard. The smaller enemy ships had begun to surround them, locking in for a final strike. It was a trap, but Emily wasn't going to let herself get caught. "Now, Daniels," she shouted. With a roar of the engines, the Vanguard shot forward, its thrusters firing at full force. The ship veered sharply to the right, dodging a barrage of plasma shots that would have obliterated them in a single hit. But Emily wasn't done yet. She had a plan. "Now, divert all power to the starboard shields," Emily commanded. "We're breaking through on that side." Daniels quickly adjusted the power grid, and the shields glowed brighter on the starboard side. Another volley of enemy fire came streaking toward them, but Emily's timing was perfect. The shields absorbed the energy, and the Vanguard shot forward, narrowly avoiding destruction. The enemy ships, momentarily disoriented by the sudden maneuver, tried to regroup, but Emily had already made her move. She ordered the ship into another sharp turn, breaking through the enemy's line and heading into deep space. "We're clear," Daniels shouted, relief flooding his voice. "Not yet," Emily replied, her eyes scanning the space around them. They weren't safe yet. The enemy fleet would regroup and come after them again, but they had bought themselves a few precious moments. "Can we signal for reinforcements now?" Harris asked, looking at the communication system. "Not yet," Emily said, her voice grim. "We need to get out of their detection range first. And we need to figure out what the hell is going on with that orb. If we don't, we won't be able to stop them from coming after it again." As the Vanguard sped through space, the tension on the bridge was palpable. The battle wasn't over. The enemy was still out there, and they would be back. But for now, they had survived. And that, Emily knew, was the first step toward winning this war. The Vanguard had gained some distance, but Emily knew it was only a matter of time before the enemy tracked them down again. The silence aboard the ship felt oppressive, but the crew moved with focused determination. Everyone knew that survival wasn't guaranteed, and the mysteries surrounding the orb had only added to the weight of the situation. As the crew gathered in the command center, Emily paced in front of them, her mind working furiously. The orb had reacted to the enemy fleet, and the implications of that were impossible to ignore. Whatever the orb was, it was more than just a powerful artifact. It was a key, possibly to something much larger and far more dangerous. "We need answers," Emily said, breaking the silence. Her voice was firm, but there was a hint of desperation in it. "And we need them now." Daniels, still at his console, tapped away furiously, his brow furrowed. "Captain, I've run multiple scans on the orb's energy signatures. There's something strange going on. This isn't a simple artifact. The energy pulses, they're not random." "What do you mean?" Emily asked, stepping closer to him. "It's like the orb is trying to communicate," Daniels explained, his eyes still glued to the screen. "But not with us. It's sending out specific pulses, almost like a beacon." "A beacon," Harris interjected, looking up from her terminal. "Who would it be signaling?" "I don't know," Daniels admitted, "but whatever it is, it's something big. And the enemy fleet wasn't just after us. They were after the orb. And it's not because of its destructive potential. I think they want to control whatever's controlling it." The realization hit Emily hard. The orb wasn't just a weapon. It was a power source, a communication device, or something far more intricate than she had ever imagined. And if the enemy could harness that power, there would be nothing stopping them from taking over the galaxy. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. We can't let that happen. We need to figure out what the orb is trying to tell us, and we need to do it fast. How do we do that? Harris asked, glancing around the room. The enemy knows we're out here, and they'll be back soon. We're on the clock. Emily nodded. They were running out of time, but she couldn't afford to make rash decisions. The answers they needed were out there, but they had to find a way to keep the orb safe long enough to figure it out. We need to get to the nearest research station, Emily decided. They have the resources to help us understand the orb's signals, and we'll be able to access more data than we have here. We can't keep playing guessing games. The longer we wait, the more likely the enemy will catch up. The crew exchanged wary looks. It wasn't an easy decision. The research station was in a neutral zone, untouched by the ongoing war, but it was also far from their current location, and the enemy fleet was getting closer. The Vanguard wasn't built for prolonged engagements with enemy forces, and they couldn't afford to risk an all-out battle again. We'll make it, Emily said, more to herself than anyone else. I know it's risky, but it's our best chance. Let's move. The crew sprang into action, making preparations for the long journey to the research station. The ship would have to make it through hostile space, dodging the enemy fleet as best as they could, and getting there undetected was their primary objective. As the Vanguard engaged its faster-than-light engines, Emily stared out at the stars, her thoughts a whirlwind. The orb had caused this entire conflict, and now she was certain that it held the key to stopping the war, or escalating it to unimaginable levels. Suddenly, the ship's sensors blared a warning. "Captain," Daniel shouted, eyes wide. "We've just picked up a transmission. It's coming from the enemy fleet." Emily's heart raced. What kind of transmission? "It's not just a communication, Captain," Daniels replied, his voice low. "It's a direct signal aimed at the orb. They're trying to hack into it." Emily froze, her mind whirling. The enemy wasn't just after the orb. They were actively trying to control it. The realization hit her like a blow to the gut. The battle they had narrowly escaped wasn't just about stopping the Vanguard. It was about capturing the orb before anyone else could unlock its secrets. "We can't let them succeed," Harris said, her voice tight with fear. "If they hack into it, there's no telling what they'll do with the power they unlock." Emily's thoughts raced. The enemy knew exactly what the orb could do. They'd seen its potential, and now they were desperate to control it. She needed to stop the signal and fast, before the enemy could take full control. "Daniels, can you block the transmission?" Emily asked urgently. "I can try," Daniels said, his fingers flying over the controls. "But it's a direct link. We'll need to disrupt their systems long enough to cut them off." Emily's hands clenched into fists. They had no choice but to act, or everything they had worked for would be lost. "Do it. We don't have time to waste." As Daniels worked, Emily felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Every decision she made now would shape the future of this war and the fate of the galaxy. The enemy was closing in, and the orb was the key to everything. Whatever secrets it held, Emily knew one thing for sure. This was far from over. And if she couldn't stop the enemy from hacking the orb, the consequences would be far worse than anything she had imagined. The Vanguard was in motion, but the battle was far from over. As Emily paced the bridge, her thoughts focused on the enemy's next move. They were on their way to the research station, but the closer they got, the more vulnerable they became. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity. The enemy was relentless, and time was running out. The transmission they had intercepted was just the beginning. "Captain, we've entered the outer perimeter of the research station zone," Daniels reported. "But the enemy fleet is not far behind. They'll catch up before we can reach the station, unless we fight our way through." Emily looked at the screen, seeing the distant silhouette of the research station in the vast expanse of space. The faint, flickering lights in the distance were a beacon of hope, but it seemed so far away. "How much time do we have?" Emily asked, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "Maybe 10 minutes at most," Daniel said. "After that, they'll have us surrounded." "Not if we make it through," Emily replied, her eyes narrowing. She turned toward Harris. "Is there any way to increase our speed and avoid the enemy? We can't fight them all." Harris was already at work, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. "I'm rerouting power to the engines, but we'll have to drop some shields to do it. The ship won't survive another barrage like before if we do that." Emily nodded, her mind racing. The only option was to outrun them, reach the research station first, and make sure the orb was protected. The enemy would likely try to destroy them the moment they saw it as a threat. "Do it," Emily said. "We've got no other choice. Full speed ahead." The ship shuddered as the thrusters roared to life, the Vanguard pushing forward with everything it had. The enemy fleet was closing in, their weapons powered up and ready to fire. "Enemy ships closing in at 30 seconds, Captain," Daniel said, his voice tense. "They're preparing to fire." Emily clenched her fists. "Get ready for evasive maneuvers. Don't let them lock on." The Vanguard lurched as it made a sharp turn to the right, narrowly avoiding a salvo of plasma bolts. The enemy ships weren't giving up, though. They were too close, and their weapons were too powerful. Emily knew that with every passing moment, they were getting closer to being outgunned and outmaneuvered. "We're not going to make it at this rate," Daniel said, his voice tight with panic. "We will," Emily said, her voice low but firm. "We have to." The ship shuddered again, and this time, it wasn't from an evasive maneuver. The Vanguard's forward shields flickered and dropped to 10%. The glow of incoming enemy fire lit up the viewport, and Emily knew they couldn't take much more of this. If they didn't get out of the kill zone soon, the Vanguard would be lost. "Captain," Harris called out, "we've got a problem. The orb, it's reacting again." Emily's heart skipped a beat. The orb was pulsing with energy, and its glow had intensified in the past few minutes. The signals were becoming more frequent, more intense. But what did it mean? The orb wasn't just sending out a signal. It was starting to resonate in a way that Emily couldn't explain. "Can we stabilize it?" Emily asked urgently. "We can try, but we don't have time," Harris replied. "If the energy output continues like this, we won't be able to control it. It could blow the ship apart if it overloads." "Great," Emily muttered under her breath. This was the last thing they needed. She didn't have time to worry about the orb's unstable energy levels while enemy ships were closing in. The orb was powerful, yes, but she couldn't let it be their undoing. "Keep it under control," Emily barked, "and keep those engines running." "All systems go," Daniels called out. "We're at maximum speed now, but we'll be in their range in 20 seconds. Emily looked at the view ahead. The research station was within reach, but it was still too far to escape. The enemy ships were just moments away from locking on. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. "Brace yourselves," Emily yelled. "We're going to break through. Whatever happens, we make it to that station." Just as the enemy ships prepared to fire, Emily made the most daring move yet. She ordered the Vanguard into a high-speed roll, spinning the ship to avoid the incoming fire. The ship's shields screamed as they absorbed the brunt of the hits, but the maneuver worked. For a brief moment, they were free from the immediate threat. But as they shot forward toward the station, Emily could see the enemy ships regrouping behind them. They had no time to waste. "We're almost there," Daniels shouted. "The station is 10 seconds away." The station's massive docking bay loomed ahead, and Emily's hands gripped the console. They were almost there. But then, "Incoming," Harris shouted, her eyes wide with terror. A massive plasma shot from one of the enemy capital ships streaked toward them. Its power enough to tear the Vanguard apart. The ship rocked violently as the blast hit the starboard side, and for a terrifying moment, everything went black. The crew's screams filled the air, but Emily's mind raced. They were losing power fast, but they couldn't stop now. They were so close. "Everyone, brace!" Emily yelled as she steered the ship, determined to make it to the station at all costs. With one final surge of energy, the Vanguard lurched forward into the docking bay, and the doors slammed shut behind them. The battle was far from over, but for now, they were safe, if only for a moment. As Emily stood there, panting and covered in sweat, she knew they had a chance, just a chance, to stop the enemy, but the Ord's power was the key to everything. The battle wasn't over, it had only just begun.